It's FoosTalk Live.
You talking to me?
Compelling and lively banter.
Are you going to talk to us?
Talking foosball.
Foosball was how I measured my value as a man. You took that away.
Players and fans, promoters and pros. Unedited and raw.
Talk.
Living in the moment.
We have a lot of important things to talk about.
All while practicing social distancing.
Cool. We'll talk. No big whoop.
Let's get this thing started. FoosTalk Live.
Coming to you live from the studios of Foosball Radio and Inside Foos TV, it's the 38th episode of FoosTalk Live. Brought to you in part by 518 Prints, one of the best printers of promotional items, t-shirts, jackets, hoodies, and foosball apparel. Visit 518prints.com today. Brought to you in part by Foosballers, the movie. Download your copy of this Joe Hesslinger documentary at foosballersthemovie.com. Also brought to you in part by Foosball Clubs USA, promoting foosball throughout the school systems all over the country. Visit foosballclubsusa.com and make a donation today. And also brought to you by the United States Table Soccer Organization, the USTSO, helping to usher in a new era of competitive foosball. Become a member and register at usafoosball.com. Well, hey there, it's Tom Robinson, back with you once again for our 38th episode of FoosTalk Live. Of course, getting ready to engage in some lively banter about this great sport of ours called foosball. Of course, it is always my great pleasure to share the hosting duties, shall we say, with our greatest of all foosball commentators in the history of the sport. Coming to you live from the great state of Colorado, it's Jim Stevens.
Hello,
Jim.
hello, Tom. Hello, everybody out there listening in foosball land. 38 episodes. That's about 9 months worth of FoosTalk Live, and what an accomplishment from you, Tom Robinson, of course, and the entire FoosTalk Live crew. It's really, really exciting to think that we started something way back then, Tom, and we've continued it now. Pushing up almost 10 months, and it's exciting to think about when we will have lots of good stuff to talk about as the tour resumes here, whenever that might be. So,
as you've said many times, Jim, this is the moment of the week when no matter how bad life is, otherwise, this is the moment of the week we can all kind of say, you know what, the rest of that stuff doesn't matter. All that matters is this 2 hours of hanging out and talking about foosball. Yeah,
that's right. Have an IPA, have a beer of your choice, settle back and spend a couple hours with us each week. And we think that you'll enjoy it. And a lot of people have. We've been getting some great comments both on Facebook and through Messenger and everything else. And we appreciate all the very, very kind words. And we're continuing to keep doing this job, keep getting it better, and really bringing the foosball community hopefully closer together. So speaking of closer together.
Yeah, speaking of close. It is true that all great chefs realize that in every recipe, main ingredients, like you and I, Jim. But then again, the recipe just doesn't work without the spice. And of course, that would be, in our case, Mark Torres.
A tarantula enjoys a fine chewing gum. A tarantula enjoys... Wait a minute. Am I on? Am I live? I'm live.
Well, yeah, live we hope. Yeah.
It's a pleasure for you guys to have you guys on my show for one more week. Thank you for joining. I'd like to welcome the great Tom Robinson and Jim Stevens. And thank 518 Sports. And sorry. All right. Boom. What? That was so confusing, Clay.
And Clay,
that just threw me way off.
Are you there? Clay,
I'm not nearly as muted as I thought I was. I'm sorry. Oh my God.
Just realized how easily disrupted my shtick is when one person can say one word and just I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Anyway, so get back on track.
Clay Toomey is our technical guy who's basic, like, I guess you could say the Baba Booey of the of FoosTalk Live. He is there at all times whenever we need him. He jumps in and takes care of any technical issues, and also handles the leash when it comes to Mark.
More like a harness, I
dog
think.
Biscuits.
Dog biscuits. Grab a cane. We need a cane.
He sets me free.
Yeah. Now, Clay is great. Clay, of course, also a very knowledgeable foosball man, and he has carte blanche on this show to jump in anytime he wants with his opinion, his viewpoint on something, and we always embrace and welcome that because his is always a little bit unique.
Oh. The main reason Clay has that power is because at any point he could just turn us all off and destroy the show on a whim. Yeah. So, thank you, Clay.
So don't get too boring or We might just have to spice it up a little bit. Little mute button.
One of the famous talk show guys back in the late 80s, early 90s out of California, Tom Likas, he would say to his guests straight out, if you are not absolutely compelling, I'm going to hang up on you.
Yes.
So there you go.
So there we go. That puts a little pressure on.
Tom.
Puts a little pressure on all of us, I think. So we will do the best we can to be compelling here tonight. And we're talking about the 1990s. Certainly, as we've talked about before, the second golden era. It was Tornado for the most part. It was basically created by Dave Currington, late 80s, Steve Murray as well. Leading into the 90s, the prize money continued to go up through the middle of that decade, and we had incredible legendary performances taking place. Tonight we're talking goalies, top 5 Tornado goalies, 1990s goalies here tonight on FoosTalk Live.
So I know that the ITSF made an announcement this week. It was on Facebook about the possibility of tournaments kicking in yet again sometime in 2021. Optimistically speaking, March or April. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was from the ITSF announcements right off their page. And they have a disclaimer in there. It's essentially says COVID permitting.
Right.
We'll have tournaments starting again. I think that's an important disclaimer because betting odds right now that it might have been a little aggressive and optimistic based on what's happening in the world with vaccine rollouts and time. However, I'm a positive guy, and I'm really hoping things start happening again in the middle of March as they proposed. If I'm going to be honest about what I see, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
We can leave it at that. So,
Yeah, same here. I'm not real sure about it either. March seems kind of early, especially for Europe. But, one thing we've learned during this last year, is that in some cases we have to plan things anyway, knowing that they may not happen. But we have to go through the process, through the steps of setting things up, preparing things, planning things as if they are going to happen. And then when they aren't, you call them off, you move on, you reschedule, whatever. So that may be a little bit of that going on here as well, as they start to take baby steps.
What they were trying to say, and I think this is certainly valid, is that they wanted to pick it up from wherever they are able to pick it up from, and then include that to for people who want to qualify for the 2022 World Cup.
Right.
And I think that whenever that happens, if it's in 2021, that would be very interesting. Do you think they would go with an abbreviated season to tally up the points to do that? Would it even be possible?
Yeah, I don't know about abbreviated. I mean, it'll have to be abbreviated on one end, but I don't think they're going to space the tournaments out once they're permitted to go. And right now, the federations all around the world are not allowing tournaments to be held in just about every country. And so once that gate is lifted, once they're allowed to run tournaments, I anticipate there'll be a flood of them. Hopefully done the right way and managed as we move forward here. And, of course, there's 4 World Series events planned for this year on the 4 other tables besides Tornado, which are basically world championships on each individual table. So those are in the works. Those are being planned. And the first one, I guess, would be in May if it happens in the Paris area, the Bonzini World Series. So, again, they're planning. Once that gate goes up, we sprint forward and we do the best we can to qualify players for 2022 because we can only do what we can do at this stage.
May it happen sooner rather than later. And all this talk about tournaments and COVID works up a powerful thirst.
What Jim and I like to do right about this time is to reveal our favorite IPA.
So, Jim, I know that talking about tournaments just makes you froth at the mouth. So what is it you're drinking today?
It really does. And I'm an IPA man. Most of you know that. But the other thing that I can drink, and I do really enjoy, is a stout. Again, a stout at times. The one I have tonight is a stout. It's not an IPA. It's from the Grand Teton Brewing Company up in Jackson, Wyoming. It's called the Black Cauldron Imperial Stout, 9.5% alcohol.
Oh,
look at that color. You can see that. Nice head on there.
Oh, it isn't a snifter, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, boy.
I'm seeing that now. That looks mighty delicious.
Ooh, that's like a dessert. It is really, really good. It's delicious. What about you, Tom?
Well, now that I know you've changed the rules, okay. Well, I'm going to drink an IPA, but it's called the Mega Boss IPA. Love the robot on the label. This is from Newburgh, New York, a brewing company. 7% alcohol. They say Mega Boss, meaning radical or awesome. Like, dude, it's awesome. Sorry, couldn't help myself. All right, so let's try it. Yeah, I'm really weak here. There we go.
Feels like you're on
feel
your
better
third one, Tom. But
Mega boss, dude.
Oh, wow, that is hoppiness. Hoppiness, yes.
definitely his third one.
All right, Mark, what is it you're consuming?
This is lemon flavored LaCroix, and it's my non-alcoholic beverage of choice. And it's lemon flavored because allegedly someone waved a lemon over it for about 20 minutes to bless it with a lemon essence. So let's try that out, you guys.
Yeah.
Take it easy on those for sure. Yeah.
Nasty. All right.
Clay?
I'm
Clay.
drinking water because somebody's got to drive home after this party. So
Yeah.
I got to drive you 3 goofballs home. So that's water for me. A vintage 2020 Dasani 16-ounce bottle of water. So there you go.
Ooh.
All right.
I'm a real party animal.
Bottled in Mexico.
Worth brew.
Yeah.
Just
Ice
make
cold.
sure you turn your microphone off when you head to the bathroom here in about 40 minutes.
Well, I'm no Tom Yor, so
Yeah.
Oh,
If the people don't understand the reference, if you listen to the Fourth Wall episode to the very end, you
Right.
can hear a bit of Tom Yor using the bathroom, and he doesn't know his mic is hot. So
Right.
if you didn't catch that, get to the very end of the Fourth Wall episode 2 weeks ago, I think, and Tom Yor is urinating on the mic. There you go.
well, not on the mic. I mean,
That's better, right? The imagery's better. So
it was great. So beautiful. No, it's funny because we did save it to the very, very end, and I think if people weren't quite paying attention, they might have thought, "Oh, there's the theme. It's done. Let's stop listening." But as soon as the theme ended, then that all took place. So yeah, if you haven't listened to that, go back and review it. It's there, and Tom Yor will never live it down, ever.
No, I'm afraid not.
we're gonna cut it.
Afraid not. Who we toasting tonight?
Well, tonight I thought perhaps we would take a look at some of those unsung heroes of Facebook. Facebook, of course, being a location where you find a lot of groups that don't have formal websites, but they do have organizations. These guys actually are hailing from everywhere. They're called the Foosball Promoters Group, and they're a Facebook group. They're an actual group. You can go on and take a look at their stuff. Right now, I think they have over 400 members, but the Foosball Promoters Group is specifically dedicated to those who are interested in promoting foosball, obviously, and looking for, want to share ways and methods to bring foosball back to its former glory. I think that's a great thing to toast. What about you guys?
No, I think so too. I
Amazing,
think
yeah,
that's wonderful, using the platform we have to kind of bring people together, working together, pulling on the same end of the rope. I think it's great.
Yep.
Cheers to you guys. Keep up the good work.
Cheers. Well. So this being, of course, again, focusing on the 1990s this week. And it seems like the 90s are such a, did I hear somebody refer to it as the second golden age of foosball?
Yeah, it kind of was. Of course, the 90s, so many great world champions that came out of that. It was sort of the beginning of the Frederic Collignon years. It was the switch between Lafredo playing forward to Lafredo playing goalie. The prize money in the World Championships was over $100,000 each and every year, and it even got up to 125, I think, one year. Mark, your memories of the 90s, and I know our flashback is going to go take us back to that decade as well. But Mark, that's your era.
Yeah. That's my era. I started playing at the end of 88, the beginning of 89, and through the early 90s. That was my time playing foosball. I have clear, fond memories of the tournaments being bigger than the infrastructure could handle. It was organizationally unmanageable because there were so many players. It still had, you had a great confluence of players from the not a ton. You had some from the 70s, but you had a ton from the 80s, and you had all the Tornado players from the Texas area in the 90s. You had a growing trajectory of foosball for a short time, and it didn't start really receding until the late 90s is when it started receding. So I introduced Lewis Cartwright for his Hall of Fame induction, and I was able to at that time say that we didn't know what we had until it was behind us, because we always referred to the 70s as the golden era of foosball. And it wasn't until the 2000s that you realized there was another great era for foosball, and it was the mid-90s.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And of course, tonight is going to be focusing on that for the top 5. And of course, our special guest is from the 90s, big name, Dana Marr.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, very, very cool. Let's take a look back and see what Jim Stevens was doing in this particular episode of FoosTalk Live Flashback.
With great moments in foosball history, this is a FoosTalk Live Flashback.
Colin sets it up, looking to pull within one of the championship. Smokes it home to the net near side. It's world championship point for Colin and Lafredo, looking to win for the second year in a row. What a performance. Looking to advance the ball to his 3. Hovers over the ball. Goes along that wall. Frederic Collignon looking for the world championship, looking to double it. Or in 99, looking to win the doubles title for the second consecutive year. He strokes it home, and for the second consecutive year, Frederic Collignon and Todd Lafredo are the World Open Doubles champions.
Congratulations out to Frederic and Todd, also to Rob and Scotty. Just a fantastic match.
Listen in next time for another great moment in foosball history. It's FoosTalk Live Flashback.
Second year in a row for Todd and Fred. Wow, that's pretty amazing stuff. 1999. Has anybody done that since?
Only them, only Fred and Todd, and that's it. In fact, that was the second of 5 in a row. They won in 2000, 2001, 2002 to make it 5 in a row. The previous year, 1998, was the year that they paired up. We had that flashback for you a few weeks ago. But Fred and Todd became the greatest team ever in 1998, followed up their win in 98 with that win in 99, 2 in a row, and went on, of course, to win a total of 12. World championships on the tornado table, which is just a ridiculous statistic, and a reflection of this great team. And of course, Mark, I know you remember those days well. Collignon really becoming one of the great players in the world, and then of course pairing with Todd. The rest is history.
It's a revival. It was a revival for Todd, and remember, up to that point, Todd was the only player to double 2 years in a row with Scotty Weidman, I believe. It was Weidman and Todd.
Yep.
And so Todd goes through a part of his foosball career, and Todd had a thing. I'm not sure. It feels like, and it feels like I'm not making this up, but Todd had a thing where he found ways to reinvent himself, found ways to revitalize his interest and enthusiasm for the game, and always found ways to challenge himself to keep it interesting. And whether that was taking different players under his wing or challenging himself to do different things. And then there was a lull. Tom's the most dominant player of the early 90s, even the late 80s and early 90s. And there was a gap where Bobby and Terry, and this is from memory, like emotional memory, Bobby and Terry are winning everything. Like, you can't win anything. It's Bobby and Terry. You don't know where Todd is. And all of a sudden, Todd's got this guy, Frederic, and people are like, who's this guy? You know, what's happening here? And then another history starts. It's whatever we want to call. That's why you can't tell someone's peak of their career until their career's over, because you think Todd's done, and then he wins 12 doubles world titles. So Todd's just an amazing story we keep telling over and over.
Oh, yeah. So here's something I'm curious about, though. This is the only time in foosball history that someone from the United States and someone from, say, Europe, have banded together to do this, because normally good doubles teams come from the same country, don't they?
Yeah, that's generally true, and that's a great point. This really was. I mean, there had been other teams. I know Dieter Thiele, the great German player, played with Thor Donovan, the American, for many years, and they had some nice finishes together. But as far as a championship team goes, yes, this would be it. It has happened since then on the other tables. P for P Tour, et cetera. It does happen to where there are mixed countries playing together. But you're right, that it was an unusual thing then, and it still is to some degree quite unusual because of the predominance of the country versus country sort of thing in the big multi-table world championship events, et cetera.
Now, here's an idea, just to float this germ out there, if you don't mind me saying. Oh, I shouldn't use that term right about now. Just to float this idea. How about someday we actually do this intentionally? You know, somebody from the U.S. pairs up with somebody else from another part of the world, or someone from another part of the world teams up with a U.S. person to do like let's say a quick tournament with just mixed nationalities.
The United Nations Invitational. Mark, write that down, would you?
Masters, the Masters Nations draw. You can't draw anyone from your own country.
Right.
That'd be good. Yeah.
And who knows what kind of combinations could come from that? Future champion doubles partners that dominate. Who knows?
I think it's probably going to happen because as the American players go overseas more and more often, they build these relationships. Athletes come here multiple times and played with Americans.
Sure.
The relationships build and they form and the friendships form. And so we'll probably see more of it down the road for sure.
Yeah.
Cool.
Hey, we brought one up there. Robert Atha has won a couple of world championships at least, a couple with Fred Collignon, one with Tom van de Cotter of Belgium. He won world championships in open doubles on other tables playing with an international partner. So that did sort of set the precedent for this kind of thing. And of course, the world changed. The ITSF came along. And international competition became something that was pretty regular. Whereas previous to that, if the players didn't come over here to the Tornado Worlds or whatever, that was about it. American players were not traveling that much until the early 2000s. So,
right.
But it is something to kind of keep an eye on, and we are an international family of players, and why not just pair up to the best of your ability with whoever you'd like, and we'll battle it out with multiple countries. Have 4 countries on the table at once. In 4-on-4, you could have 8 countries on the table. Now there's something for you. How about that?
That'd be cool. That'd be a blast. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's an international world, and it's a universal language. Kumbaya.
Exactly.
Okay.
Kumbaya.
We've had our moment. Yeah, our moment. We need more moments like that lately. But anyway, speaking of moments, now you guys I know are about to take off the gloves and go head to head on this. The top 5. Well, we're talking about the top 5 goalies of the 1990s, of which I'm completely oblivious. But I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. Are you guys ready for this?
Oh yeah,
let's do this.
Let's dive in.
Time once again for the FoosTalk Live Top 5.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Here's Jim Stevens and Mark Torres.
Yeah, Mark, the 1990s were a fascinating decade. They really, really were. And, the one thing we saw in the 1990s, one thing that was a little bit different than we had seen previously, was that we started to see basically hybrid type players. In the 70s and the 80s, there were goalies. Yeah. And, that's what you had. You had forwards, you had goalies. But as the 90s came along, you started to see these hybrid players, whether it was Don Swan, whether it was Robert Mares, even Tommy Atkinson played quite a bit of goalie. Later in the decade, we're talking Lewis Cartwright, who was a forward, then a goalie. It becomes kind of difficult to nail down your top 5 goalies. It was not an easy list to put together because you really had to remember, did they win that event as a forward or did they win that event as a goalie? And it made it kind of tough. So one of the things I've done, my 5 goalies are, for the most part, obviously goalies first. And so that eliminated some big names who won some major championships, including world championships from my top 5. And that's how I kind of had to look at it because of the change in players. In the 1990s into the 2000s and even today, you're getting these hybrid type players. Very few players are pure goalies anymore. So I don't know how you approached it, but that was my take.
The beauty of that's the beauty of this thing we do is Jim and I can approach it differently. We could rationalize and justify our picks differently. I didn't do that, Jim. I had to look at, so because the 90s were difficult to dominate. Frankly, it was difficult to dominate. No one really one forward and goalie team really dominated for a short time, which is incredibly impressive. But you talked about it the other week, Jim, where open singles had like 8 different people win in 10 years or something. Yeah. We're talking about an era where 10 different people could win open singles at every major. And an era where there were some super teams, there always were, but a lot of teams were in the mix. And there were always, here's the beauty about the 90s, there were always teams you didn't expect that were in the top 3. You didn't expect them at all. And Dana Maher was going to be a great example of this because he got to the finals of some majors with Ron Cipiora and Fernando. Mm-hmm. He got into the finals of these majors, and you could do that because there's so many teams. So the 90s, very unique, very, to your point, Jim, challenging to narrow it down. And we came at it from different places. I'm sure I probably have at least one person you don't have. But that's the beauty of this format.
Well, Steve Murray will be on your list, as he always is, right?
Yeah, top 5 brunettes.
There-
Steve Murray.
All right.
Number 5.
Hey, Tom, let's do
Always.
this, buddy.
Talk Live Top 5. Number.
So going back to this, not to be redundant, it was tough, but if you look at the body of work, and I'm because it was difficult to dominate, you look at the body of work, and you look at the things he's remembered for and the things he did well. My number 5 is going to be Robert Morris. He's got the big open doubles win in '96. Jim, was it '96 with Tommy? Is
Yes,
that
it
when he
was.
won?
Yep.
It was '96. But more than that, he was in the finals of doubles all the time. He was like up in regionals, state tournaments, winning them, getting into and I believe, I couldn't hear it that well in the flashback. Was it Scotty Weidman and Robbie that were in the finals of that event against?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, he was in the finals of that open doubles. I had forgotten that he was in that world championship final. I don't know what position he played, but I can assure you this, to your hybrid comment, they probably had to switch.
Yep.
That's another thing about the 90s. People were switching around. You got different forward games, different goalie games. There was a time where Robert Mars was the number 1 player in the world in Tornado, in the U.S. basically, for years. It was a whole span of time where he was the number 1 player, and it was because he was a great all-around player. He was playing goalie for Spear. I played Robert Mars and Tom Spear for 5th in open doubles at the Worlds when I was an expert in like 92 or 93 or something. And Mars was the goalie, and he was the difference. So Robert Mars, my number 5.
Yeah, no, it's a good one, and it's one I could not put on my list as much as I wanted to, because when he and Tommy won that world championship, there was a lot of switching. Both players played both positions extensively. And again, it's hard for me to look at Robert Mars as only a goalie, even though he's won world championships, of course, with Tony Spratum, and maybe he's morphed into a goalie as the years have gone by, goalie/forward, as opposed to what I think he was in the 90s, a forward/goalie. No, my number 5 is a guy that did most of his work in the early part of the decade, but continued to be a great player, and then finally broke through in 2003 with a world championship with Adrian Zamora. And that's the outstanding goalie. And this man was a goalie out of Houston, Texas, Eddie Gartman. Goalie of the year in 1992. When Terry Moore first came out on tour in 92, he paired up with Eddie Gartman, and they won the Hall of Fame class, or rather, as it was called then, the kickoff, to open up the season with Terry using that snake shot. Eddie was his goalie. Later that year, they reached the finals at the World Championships as well in open doubles, losing to John Smith and Kevin Keeter. And so this is a guy that, was a great shooter, really, really good shooter, a good defensive player, smart, but just had that goalie mentality. You know, Tom, I can kind of pick out, when I see young players, I can pick out the guys that could become really good goalies. There's a certain aura to them. There's a certain way they approach the game and approach life in general. I think they're kind of like catchers in baseball, right? Where these guys just want to be a goalie. They want to be a goalie. I'm not worried about playing forward. I'll play forward so I can learn more about the goalie position. And so, this is really what Eddie Gartman was. He was a pure goalie, a successful pure goalie. I've got him as my number 5.
I got a quick word about Eddie, man. That's a great choice, by the way. Eddie and Kevin Keeter, okay? These are guys that would set the ball up on the wall on the 2-bar, and they would go coast to coast, dead bar long, on a whim. And they put so much pressure on the other team because they were on goal with their pull shot. Eddie had one thing he did where he did like a reverse push kick. So it was on the wall, and the one thing he did that people were always looking for was either the coast-to-coast dead bar long, all the sprays, all the shots in between, or a reverse push kick from the wall, bumper to bumper, reverse push kick. And he just would be on goal and put incredible pressure. Great choice, Jim. I love Eddie Gartman at number 5.
FoosTalk Live Top 5. Number 4.
I'm looking at my list now, and I'm almost just wondering if I should swap my number 3 with my number 4. I don't know if I should trust my instincts or not, but I'm gonna put Scotty Weidman at number 4. I'm gonna put Scotty Weidman at number 4 because he played primarily goalie. If anyone could go back far enough and remember, as a rookie, and this speaks to Tom Spear's greatness. As a rookie, he was an amateur, if you want to call it that. He was in the finals of open doubles at the Worlds with Tom Spear. He actually, I believe, if my memory serves me, he had a shot to win it. Tom Spear actually called a third timeout and had a technical called. Scotty Weidman, I believe, had a shot to win the open doubles world title as an amateur. when he got pulled to the front because Tom Spear had to block. Jim, who was he blocking? Damn, I don't even remember who they played. Was it Kevin Keeter and John Smith? I think it might have been Kevin Keeter and John Smith. But Scotty Weidman went from there, and it's an incredible tribute to his commitment and dedication to the game that he goes under Lafredo's wing, and is so impressive to Lafredo, working hard and taking in all the knowledge and being committed to the position that they're the first team to go back-to-back, winning open doubles at the Worlds. And then Scotty's always in it. And he's a true, of course, he transitions later. He has the great open doubles win with Mike Bowers. I believe it's versus Fernando and Dana.
Mm-hmm.
So they had that great win.
Down
we
in
can talk
Atlanta,
about that
yeah.
later. Dana could talk about it. Yeah. But Scotty Weidman, at one point, a pure consummate goalie that transitioned his game to be an incredible two-way player, a fabulous goalie in his own right during the 90s.
Yeah, no, great goalie. Let me correct something real quick. When talking about Eddie Gardman, he did win with Terry Moore at the kickoff that year in '92, and then finished second at the Nationals. And of course, it was Kevin Keeter and John Smith winning the year before in '91. So we Mark and I are both jumbling up our early '90s a little
our
bit.
History, yeah.
I also have Scotty Weidman at number 4, and it was tough because Weidman also could play the forward position and had the great defensive 5. And was an effective forward. But when he and Todd Lafredo went back-to-back in 94 95, he was a goalie. And he also had a few other really nice finishes as a goalie. But going back-to-back kind of says it all. And this was a guy that, again, kind of flew under the radar to some degree. The man's not in the Hall of Fame and probably should be. In fact, definitely should be. But he was really made his stripes as a goalie in the early 90s into the mid-90s, learning from some of these great players, Bowers and Spear, of course, etc. But he was effective back there, and especially defensively. Primarily a guy that would try to clear the ball, get it up there to Lafredo, would score here and there. But it was his defense. And again, it doesn't get a credit either as being the smart player that he was. To have a great 5, to have a great defensive 5, to be a good defensive goalie, you've got to be smart. He was, to me, he was the 4th best goalie of the 1990s.
FoosTalk Live Top 5. Number 3.
I was debating between Scotty Weidman at number 4 and swapping with Todd Lafredo at number 4. So I got Todd Lafredo at number 3. I got Todd Lafredo at number 3 because he wins in 98 and 99. And if we want to count 2000, he wins the 2000. I know it's not the 90s. And then he wins 2001 and 2002. What are you going to do? The guy's playing goalie, almost pure goalie, unless it's a situation when him and Fred want to just mess around and win a tournament with Fred at goalie.
Which they did.
I like Todd there, though, because Todd is, we go back to last week, make no mistake, Todd had incredible impact on all these players in Colorado. He had incredible impact on Robert Mars, incredible impact on Terry Moore, incredible impact on Scotty Weidman. Of course, Tom Spear and Todd Lafredo represented the oil and water that pushed each other to the extreme maximum of performance potential in foosball. It's just tough to put Todd Lafredo underneath Scotty because Todd's influence on Scotty. And then Todd Lafredo wins 2 world champions. Well, gosh, maybe I'm blurring the lines, but now he's at this point has 5 open doubles world championships or so in the 90s. So Todd's influence has me sitting at number 3.
Yeah, and folks, we do not share our lists with each other beforehand, but I also have Lafredo at number 3. And to clarify, Todd Lafredo won 6 open doubles world championships during the 1990s. 4 as a forward and 2 as a goalie. He switched to goalie in 1998. Got in 2 years in the decade, 98 and 99. That's it. Played 2 years on tour that year as a full-time goalie. And we have him at number 3 on our goalies of the 1990s. That shows you the influence he had on so many players. And of course, we've got to factor in those next 3 world championships, heck, those next 10 world championships when talking about Todd Lafredo. But for those 2 years, 1998 and 1999, this was the best goalie in the world, a guy who just became a goalie in 1998 on a full-time basis. And he was the best goalie in the world those 2 years. And so you kind of got to throw him in there. And then you throw on top of that what he did in open doubles, just generally speaking, during that decade. Again, 4 as a forward, 2 as a goalie. Remarkable. But for me, Lafredo, the influence, the scoring, the defense, what he did for Frederico as a player, They don't become Collignon and Lafredo without the influence of Todd Lafredo. Frederick Collignon does not become the greatest player of all time without Todd Lafredo. It's as simple as that. They'll both tell you that, and we'll tell you that as well. So for me, Lafredo, despite only 2 years as a full-time goalie, is number 3 on my list as well.
FoosTalk Live Top 5. Number 2.
There's one particular goalie out there. I don't have the full history of foosball in front of me, the World Championship history. I don't have that in front of me, but I can only think of one goalie that won back-to-back world titles with different forwards. And this goalie, most people will have never seen him play unless you were a 90s guy. I don't know how much video there is of him. I love this guy at number 2 as well, because when you talk about guys that did the most with the least, this guy did not have the overpowering long pull shot from the 2-bar. As a matter of fact, he didn't do anything with power and tremendous, fire from the 2-bar. Nothing of excitement from the 2-bar. But he's the first person that I saw use the shell game defense, where he was a masterful defender. And I believe that other players, including Bobby Diaz, end up getting their defense from my number 2. My number 2 is Gus Trevino. And Gus Trevino wins open doubles in 89 with Tom Spear, in 90 with Todd Lafredo, and then 92 with Todd Lafredo. And there's a bunch of high finishes and other tour. I watched Gus Trevino and Todd Lafredo win open doubles at San Bernardino, whatever it was called. I think it was the Nationals or I don't know, U.S. Open, one of those tournaments. I watched him and Todd get to the finals of so many majors. He was a sought-after goalie.
Yep.
And if you saw him play, you would never expect it. I mean, the guy's pull shot was like a turtle. But he would put that thing on your 3-bar. He'd plant it on your 3-bar with a pass. He'd exploit all the open lanes with all the inside game, and he would brick you. He would absolutely arrest you. And he played with, I think he played with Lewis Cartwright. I think he played with Jeep, and he was always up there. He was an incredible maestro defender and a huge genesis for how defense moving forward be played. I got Gus Trevino at number 2.
Yeah, so do I. Gus Trevino at number 2. Let me flesh out a little bit of this. Between 1990 and 1994, when basically he retired after that year, he was in 10 open finals, major finals. Amazing. On the professional tour, and won 7 titles, including the 2 world championships in the 90s, the one in 1989 as well. And it was 89 and 90 when he went back-to-back with Spear and then Lafredo. And no, there wasn't a lot to look at, but our good friend Clay Toomey has a goalie quotient, basically a number that he comes up with based on lots of different statistics, clearing percentage, effectiveness. There's a plus-minus sort of aspect to it. And I'm guessing that if we were to chart the play of Gus Trevino, he would finish pretty high on those charts. Very, very smart player, good defensively, the shell game defense, clearing percentage was always high, great teammate, a cerebral kind of player. Again, in basically 5 years, 10 finals. That's pretty solid.
Amazing.
2 world championships.
Yeah.
Another guy on this list who should be in the Hall of Fame. There's no question about it. Those 2 guys, for me, maybe at the top of the list of should be Hall of Famers, Weidman and Trevino. But, I remember when he retired, my first full-time year on the professional tour in the 90s was 1994. And that was basically his last year. He was in the finals with Terry Moore at the national championships in St. Louis, losing to Tom Yore and Casey Pruitt in a relatively famous match. But that was pretty much it for him. I may only have 2 or 3 matches of Gus Trevino in the Inside Foos archives. But a guy that the reputation precedes him, the record speaks for itself, and his style of play, which, again, I'm sure Bobby Diaz took a little bit from it. I'm sure Scotty Weidman took a little bit from it as well, because Weidman, not a heavy hitter back there. But when you look it over, when you look at the numbers, you listen to people, you remember what you saw yourself, Gus Trevino deserves number 2 on my list as well.
FoosTalk Live proudly presents the Top 5. Number 1.
I don't think there's any doubt. There was never any doubt. All you have to do is look at any set of banners in a foosball room, and you know who the number 1 goalie of the 90s was. I'll just highlight some things for the players that are beginners and or novice level players that are hearing this. What is the shell game defense? it's important to look at defenses. The further you go back, all you have really are iterations of race defenses. It seems like a human instinctive thing to try to get to a hole faster than the other person. Leaving a hole open and rushing out to that hole was pretty much how defenses were formed early on. Think of the Stone Age of foosball. It's all a race. Or anywhere you get foosball tables, people are racing.
Mm-hmm.
Something happens at some point where people start to understand the size of the goal and the size of the men, and blocking always being on 2 of the 3 holes and creating certain systems of movement that never overblock. There's such thing as overblocking a hole. There's blocking the appropriate amount of the hole to challenge someone to hit a precise hole, and those are advanced defensive techniques. And that's where I saw Gus Trevino make a huge, because he didn't race you. He never raced you. He moved in a pattern or no pattern, but he knew where he knew where his men were going to be when you shot, and he was always blocking 2 holes, and he was never, ever rarely out of position. And Bobby Diaz took that with a level of depth and attention to detail and focus on the individual player and pushed it to new levels. And we see him still successful blocking people, but the amount of energy and movement and efficiency with the way he is methodically deciding where his men are going to be, that's advanced, hyper grandmaster level defense. And Bobby Diaz took that and won more titles. Jim's going to get to him in a second. Jim, why don't you take it away and tell us what Bobby Diaz did in the 90s?
So you're assuming I have him at number 1 as well.
If you don't have him at number 1, I'm going to turn you off.
There should be an investigation. Yeah, no question. Bobby Diaz, started the 1990s paired up with fellow Floridian Chris Starcheski and had some success on tour. Then in 1994, up in San Francisco at the kickoff up there, that is right after I signed the full-time deal with Tornado to work the professional tour, my first event, the kickoff up in San Francisco. Bob Diaz is playing with Johnny Horton. Mm-hmm. And during, I believe it might have been the final, might have been the winner's bracket final, these 2 guys start getting in each other's faces. They're teammates, and they're getting in each other's faces. During timeouts, they had to be broken up. It was almost going to be a fight, much to the dismay of Johnny Horton, right? And this is the first time I see them. Yeah. They go on and they win the Open Doubles Championship that year, but they never play together again. And later, in 1995, somehow, I don't know how it went down. We'll have to ask Bobby if we ever get him on, or Terry Moore. But those 2 paired up. And they made it to the finals in 95 at the World Championships, losing to Lafredo and Weidman. In 1997, they win the World Championships for the first time. The one and only World Championship for Terry Moore and Bobby Diaz. 14 total major championships for this great team, the team of the 90s. But just the one World Championship. They reached the final again in 1998 as they lose to Collignon and Lafredo as they won their first World Championship. But 14 titles, the way he did it, in fact, 14 titles just with Terry, 1 or 2 other titles with others. But the way he did it, again, the slow movement. Now, we've all seen Bobby Diaz get drilled by that high pro player, that low master player that just has his hat down and ignores everything Bobby says and does, because these players probably aren't smart enough for Bobby to block them, if you know what I mean. The better the player, the smarter the player, the better the defender Bobby Diaz was and is still to this day. But it's the first time we ever saw the shell defense absolutely played like that, where he would sit dead still, leave a 4-inch hole in that long and dare you to shoot it. And if you scored it, maybe he didn't even move, but he got in your head, and he got in your head for later, and he got you thinking later. A lot of times it came down to just an A-B. He'd move that goalie rod around and just sort of show you A, B, A, B, A, B. The other guy would barely move until he did. And you always, it was covered 2 of the 3. If you picked the one, good shot. But this was the most dynamic, the most legendary, and I think the most successful goalie of that decade, of the second golden era, the 1990s. It was Bobby Diaz. And so, Mark, I think this week, after I won last week, of course, and that final sprint at the end, I think this week we have to call it pretty much a draw, because our 2 lists were almost identical. You had Mahrez, I had Gartman in the number 5 position, and they were interchangeable in my opinion. They were, depending on how you looked at it. But the rest of it was dead even, and we did not consult, folks. We came at these independently.
We don't consult on lists.
Right. Okay. All right. We'll take that. Now, last week we had during our special feature, Ask Us Anything. Somebody wants to know we didn't get to this question. Who would be the best trash talker, Bobby Diaz or Johnny Horton?
There's two different levels. One is a legit, like Bobby Diaz can be witty, and he could push your buttons in certain ways and push boundaries depending on how many drinks he's had in him. He can be absolutely crude and rude. Johnny, you're always playing with absolute risk. Now Johnny could do it too, but I would say, I don't know the answer to that question.
But we got to throw Tommy Atkinson into that mix as well as another guy. In my opinion, maybe Tommy Atkinson was the best of all of them, because for the most part he was under control, and he was hilarious, and he was cutting.
Yeah,
and we have seen Bobby and Tommy go at it, and I've usually given it to Tommy when it comes down to it.
I would take Tommy.
Yeah,
I would take Tommy. That's a good call.
Okay.
Yeah. And Bobby had his
intimidators.
Yeah, he was a very intimidating player, no question.
Like Murray.
Yeah.
Murray is an intimidator.
Yeah.
There's a different type of, that has its place too. I think that's kind of fun in its own right.
Now, good question though for whoever asked that, and that's a topic we're going to be talking more and more about as time moves forward, for sure.
Absolutely. I think that was a Michael Stahl question, in fact, and he already had one that night. So if we didn't want to give him to but we love
I love Michael Stahl. I love you, buddy.
Yeah, the best. So, well, I mean, talking about goalies, this is fascinating for me because I love that position. It's something that, once I get a chance to get back on the table competitively, I'm practicing my goalie. Of course, it's tough when you're the only person on the table to do that when it comes to blocking.
Yes.
But hey, I can dream.
But to your point, Tom, and I think Mark would agree with this as well. You really want to start your career off as a goalie if you can. You learn more about the game. The catcher always knows more about the game than just about anybody, and you learn about the game back there. It also it doesn't almost matter who you draw in a DYP. You're going to be okay. And so you but you learn about the game, and then you can evolve and become a forward or not. Oh, sure. Be a goalie your whole career. Nothing wrong with that either. But it's great to talk goalie talk. I'm a big goalie guy, and I've played a little goalie in my career as well, especially in the later parts of my career. And I love the position. It's so cerebral. It's so interesting. You can have such an effect on the game, both against the opponents and with your partner as a point guard. You're a catcher. You're a point guard, and you can really affect the game mostly mentally.
Yeah, and you're the support system. If the goalie's holding you up.
I'm excited to get Dana on here in a minute. I'll just say this: I'm a forward, but I ended up playing a lot of goalie because I stopped practicing 27 years ago. So you end up playing a lot of goalie. The beautiful thing about goalie is just that I didn't practice enough on the 2-bar. I don't have the skills. But I played a couple of years ago with Billy Pappas, and we got to 4th or whatever in open doubles, and it was so mental and so cerebral and so intellectually based on anticipating. And of course, Billy Pappas up there is pretty good too. Yeah. Right? Having Billy Pappas playing forward for you is pretty good. But you can be smart, and if you know where your men are at all times, and you can get the ball across the table when you get a block, you can win championships with the right forward. You can do it. So I think goalie is an incredible mental game.
Oh yeah.
And for me as well, one final point on what makes a great goalie. You want to do the basics, of course, but the other part of it is that I'm always preaching is controlling the tempo of the game. You basically have a foundation of taking 10 to 15 seconds every single time you get it back there. You're going to take your time every single time. Now, down the road, after doing that 5 or 6 times, if a quick shot appears, okay, maybe you bust it. But otherwise, when that ball gets back to you, everything grinds to a stop. Nothing can happen against you when you have that ball back there. You're controlling the time of possession. You're making sure of things. You're setting things up. And it's such an important part of the game. Every great goalie has that ability to control the tempo, the pace of the game, and it can be such a major part of a championship-winning team.
Oh, awesome point. Awesome point. Well, since we're on this topic of the 90s and great goalies, I mean, it only goes without saying that, of course, our special guest would be in both of those categories. Of course, all the way from Northern California, it's time for us to welcome our special guest, Dana Maher, the legendary Dana Maher from the 90s. Dana, are you with us?
I'm here.
There you are, man.
Hello.
Hey, Dana.
Welcome to
408. The 408 is represented.
408, baby. That's my area code, 408.
How you guys doing, man? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So Dana, I think you knew Mark Torres at a younger age.
Yeah, I got a couple of things I want to say first before I start this.
Okay.
I'd be curious to know what my goalie index is from Clay, but we can talk about that later. But more important than that, can I have control over the mute button for Mark Torres? Is that
Yeah, we can do a secret password. Just say balls and I'll mute him. Every time you say balls, I'll mute him for 10 seconds.
All right. And as far as the trash talking goes, I have to agree with Jim on that. That I think Tommy Jackson was the best, and only for one reason, and that was because he never directed any of that at anybody in particular. You know, it was always up in the air. It was open for interpretation. But unlike Johnny and Bob, it was never directed directly at a person on the other team.
Okay.
So for that reason, I think he was the best trash talker.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Man, I wish I was in on that. I had so many things I wanted to say while you guys were going on with that, but very cool, though. Very cool.
I mean, you can share your top 5 if you'd like. I mean,
let's do that. Let's do it. I want to hear his top 5.
Yeah, top 5 goalies of the '90s. He was right there, you know. So he was right. He was in the trenches, in the pit, deep in the pits.
You want to give him the music? You want to count him down 5 to 1? You got 5 goals, Dana. Let's count you down.
No, it's a little. I had a whole new respect for you guys trying to do this, because when I was first asked to do this, I thought it was really going to be duck soup. I'll knock out 5 guys, it's no problem, right?
Yeah.
But then you actually start trying to do it, and it's not as easy as you think. So the problem that I have right now is my almanac on all my Foos newses are in storage, so I didn't have a timeline to reference. Well, you guys might be able to help me out, Jim in particular here, but I'll start off with throughout at what I would have put my 3 choices for what would have been a number 6.
Okay.
Ended up tossing these guys out.
I like it.
Okay. And those 3 guys were Bob Maloney, Mike Rousseau, and Scotty Weidman.
Yeah.
And you guys had Weidman on your list, and I'm going to tell you why I didn't put him on mine. And it was simply because, in my opinion, I'm going to get it, I think makes a good goalie, but in my opinion, Scotty's best attribute was his intimidation. He was very intimidating. Goalie skills were above average, but not great. He had some weaknesses. He had a hard time corralling the ball. He'd let the ball hit the back wall and bounce out of there. You know, there was some things that he wasn't great at, but he was great at intimidation. You really felt that part of the pressure of it. So those are the 3 guys I threw out. And I'm going to get back to Rousseau. Maloney, he was something else. It was hard for me not to put him up there because the guy was a great player. He played with Spear. He did good in singles. I remember him winning singles championships as well as being a goalie. And I think that was even before the hybrid thing started to come out.
Yeah, I think the bulk of Bob's results, I think, were mostly in the 80s. He did extend into the early 90s. He was on the show a couple of weeks ago, and we talked to him about it. Absolutely. A cerebral player, smart player, who great goalie, great singles player. Go ahead, Dana.
Yeah, and that's where my timeline thing is out. And same thing with Mike Rousseau. He's pretty much an guy. But I know for a fact that Mike was in, I don't know, at least half a dozen finals in the 90s, some of them with Randy, and I know that he finally got his first major win with Tony Bacon. It's either the U.S. Open or the Nationals, and I can't remember what year it was, but Mike, in my opinion, Mike Rousseau was one of the best goalies that I'd ever seen. He had the ability to do all the things that I'm going to talk about that I think make a good goalie. But I will get to my now. I won't keep you guys waiting. Number 5. Okay, I had 2 to throw out 1 and keep 1. I threw out Garrett. Sorry, Garrett, and I kept Lewis Cartwright.
Yeah,
I put Lewis Cartwright at number 5, and that was simply because he had that Louis shuffle, and people feared it until you figured out how to run it. It was brutal, you know, and he kind of came up with that on his own too. So my number 5, Cartwright, and that was I think before maybe he started playing a lot of forward, but I got to put him at number 5. And let's see. Number 4, same thing. The top of this list was pretty easy for me. The bottom half was a lot harder. Number 4, I had 2 names again, and this is a time thing because I threw out Mike Bowers in favor of Don Swan. And I think I did that strictly because, if I remember right, Bowers took a break, and he wasn't around. Jim could help me out on this, but I think that was a period that Bowers kind of backed away from the game a little bit.
He did. He won the one title with Scotty Weidman. I want to say it was 97, maybe 98, down at Atlanta.
It was 98. It was against me.
That's right. It was against you. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was Bowers really the only time he notched a win during that decade.
And by the way, that was Fernando. I don't mind pointing fingers and taking blame because I don't care about being diplomatic. Fernando blew that final. Everyone told Fernando to shoot a rollover, and he decided. And if I'll preface it by saying, and I have no shame in saying this, Dana's probably the best goalie that Northern California and arguably California ever saw. He's one of the top master goalies all time out of California. And they got to that final, and Dana played amazeballs, and Fernando decided he was going to shoot a pull shot, and everyone was like, "This is Mike Bowers. Please shoot your rollover." And they lost that final. Anyway, I thought it made it better and bad at the same time.
Still stings a little bit with for sure.
Yeah, I see what's going on. Mark doesn't want me to push that mute button. I see what's going on.
Yeah, it's all ploy.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dave.
So the next 3, I put Gus at number 3. He was, despite his haircut, he was amazing. He really was. I have nothing but to say about his game. He could adapt. He could definitely exploit weaknesses in the other team. So I got Gus Trevino at 3.
He did sport the Colorado mullet there for a little while, didn't he?
Yeah.
Dude. Garbage pail kid. He looked like a garbage pail kid. Anyway.
Okay, so then I'm sure we know that number 2 and number 1 are the same pretty much for all you guys, but I put Bobby at number 2. The reason I put Bobby at number 2 and not number 1 is because Bobby's a great goalie, but half of his greatness is gimmick. And Jim touched on it a little bit. With the better the player, the more Bobby could get into their pocket. And so for that reason, I'm taking away a little bit of his pure goalie talent skills and attributing a little bit of that to his gimmick or intimidation, however you want to call it. But I put Bobby at 2, and I put Todd Lafredo at number 1. And I think that Todd, over the years, I've seen him do things that just blow the mind. I mean, he'll bail out forwards in crucial situations. And the reason for this, is he does things that are very subtle that go unnoticed by the average player. And I'm going to give you one example. And this is a term that a lot of people are not familiar with, but Todd is the absolute best at doing what they call cradling the ball. Are you guys familiar with that? Anybody know what that means? Okay.
Keeping it in your area?
Cradling the ball is... I'll tell you what it is. Cradling the ball is when he pushes it on the 2-bar from the push hand over, and he's setting it up for a pull shot. His man is directly on that ball the whole time it's traveling across the table. Okay. That's called cradling it. So he has the ability there to shoot at any given time. He's not waiting for the ball to his man. Yeah. He's cradling it all the way. So he's a threat the entire time. And to say that but to be able to do it with any accuracy is a very, very difficult thing. And that's just one of the subtle things that Todd's great at. The other thing is his ability to block slop. I mean, I've seen the guy save points that would have ended matches just with his reflex. And Todd has spent some time with me at my house, and I know how he learned these things. I mean, some of it was wacky. The guy used to put half of his foosball table up on a chair so that it was at an angle, and he would have people drop balls downhill basically at him with just his left hand on the goalie, and he would practice swiping them.
Wow.
As soon as they would get to the goal, he would just swipe them, and that was just a thing that he would do, and you could see it in his game. He'd done it so much that when those balls came at him, it was just like he was practicing at home, Jeez. So for those reasons, that's why I put Todd number 1. And I mean, also, I do think he's the greatest player ever. So,
yeah,
my top 5 in the Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, no, and we saw Todd, of course, play the goalie position the first 8 years of the 90s when he would play singles or when he would switch back there. And yes, just as you said, Todd can release at any time, and he can do it from any angle, and he can do it in a variety of ways over the years he's had at Banks, etc. But as a full-time goalie, he was only a goalie 2 years during the 1990s. However, he was an incredible goalie, and that's why he was able to get to the number 2 spot on both our lists, even only playing 2 years. And so, and obviously you're an admirer of him. You're a goalie. You see these things. You see this the cradling of the ball that the rest of us don't see. But the only reason he's number 2 on my list was because of the 2-year span, and that was it as a goalie.
But I think it's important. I'll say this before you go, Dana. I'll say that it's critical that you have such a discriminating eye because you're a master level goalie. And I'm not a master level goalie, and that makes your list more valid than mine because you see the nuance. So we talk about top goalie, not necessarily the wins. It's the things you could see that I can't see. And there's two. And I'll say this: I used to watch Todd. Remember when Todd used to win Goalie Wars all the time on the tour? He would win he'd play Goalie Wars, win every single time. He has world championships winning Goalie War. It was just an easy thing for him. The shooting was unparalleled. So that goes back to the cradling. And then the other thing about it, why I could see Todd number 1 is that kryptonite bullet. I could never do this because I was never good enough to hold something in my pocket and use it when I needed it. I always had to use it as soon as I could because I couldn't save anything because I was always playing catch up or losing. Todd can have something and say, I'm going to use that at 4-4. And there it is. And he does it to you from his 2-bar and the match is over. I got a bank. I know it's there, but I'm not going to shoot it now. I need to shoot it at 3-3 so we can get a 4-3.
Better than anybody ever at that. Yep.
Yeah.
For sure.
Anyway, Dana, please. Yeah.
But one last thing, though, too. I was, as you were talking there, Dana, I was trying to envision Todd Lafredo lifting a table up to put it up on a chair. Todd's not, he was not a Mr. Universe contestant like Tom Spear. I'm just was trying to picture that. But go on.
Yeah, I'm not sure I said that he lifted the table, but I think I said the table was on a chair. But you're right. I don't see that either. And I may have been influenced a little bit too by his goalie playing after the 90s, even though this is what the subject is. But it's still it was tough for me not to put Robbie in there because Robbie's a great goalie. In my opinion, Robert Maher, if you were to ask me, one of the categories I have written down here is current favorite goalies, and there's 2 of them in there: Robert Maher and Terry Rue. And Robert, he's an outstanding goalie in the 90s, but he did have a weakness. And I love the guy to death, but back in those days, he would really block a pull shot. He really, he didn't really have a good concept the same way he did as with blocking a rollover. So it was tough for me not to put him on there, but he is my favorite one of my favorite goalies right now. So that's my top 5 right there.
Yeah, we appreciate your perspective on that for sure. I mean, it is one of my favorite things to watch and play, of course, is goalie, and we greatly appreciate your perspective on that. So our tradition here, Dana, just in case you're not aware, when you're a special guest, you have to go through me to start with. What I like to do is really kind of take you way back in time, go all the way back to the early days of the first time you ever saw a foosball table. What was it, and how old were you?
Okay. So the first time I saw one was at the local mall here, a place called Time Zone.
Okay.
And that went on top TS tables. And I would go in there, and this exaggeration, you go in there, and back then they used to have little round slots on top of the tables where you could put your quarters. Right. And I think you got like maybe 10 of them on there. And we would put our quarters up. And back then it was the Filipinos that would really run the table.
Really?
And you would wait. Yes, you would wait. You would wait literally an hour to play a game, get beat 5-0 or 5-1, put your quarterback up there and wait another hour. That's pretty much time when there was nobody around. What?
You kept going back. You kept going even though you were getting beat.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. And I went to that same arcade during the day. Back then, my allowance was like a couple a week, and I could spend it easily on a Space Invaders or a Pac-Man game in about 10 minutes, right? But what I could do is I could wear 2 shirts down to time zone, and I could put my quarter in that machine and take off one of my shirts and stuff it in the goal, and I could play for hours with my 25 cents, you know, which is basically what I did.
Yeah.
So, but you guys have to understand something, that I got to where I was in my career in foosball with my brain. I never was faster than anybody on the table. I couldn't hit the ball any harder than anybody, but I had a really good eye and a good memory of people's tendencies or their tells, things like that. That's what made me the player that I was.
So when was the first time you actually went out and hit a major tour event, and what happened there?
Okay, so my first time ever, I live in San Jose, and I had played in one tour tournament at San Jose State.
Okay.
And at that time, it was actually on the tour poster. I want to say it was like a $2,500 tournament. And at the time, I lived with a foosball player named Scott Stewart. And maybe a month after that tournament, Scott comes to me out of the blue on a Thursday night, and he says, I'm going to drive to Salt Lake City. I believe this was 1984. It might have been 85. Not too sure, but he says, I'm going to drive to Salt Lake City to play in a foosball tournament. Do you want to go? I had $90 in my pocket, and I told him, yeah, I want to go, man. I want to go. So we jump in his car. He's got his girlfriend with him at the time, and I'm sitting in the back seat, and we're 10, 15 minutes down the road, and he says, stop in Concord and pick this guy up on the way. He wants to go too. And I said, okay, whatever, you know. And we stop in Concord, and we pick up this guy whose name happens to be Thor Donovan. And I had never met Thor, didn't know him from Adam. You know, here's me, at least semi-pro player with one tournament experience under my belt. And me and Thor, we sat in the back seat for an 18-hour ride to Salt Lake City, and we just kind of hit it off.
18 hours?
And, yeah, something like that.
Wow.
That was pretty long, maybe 12 hours. But it was a long time, and he decided on that ride there that we were going to play together because neither one of us had a partner.
Cool.
So here's me playing, and I gotta throw in this little additive here, that before that I'd lived in Tucson, Arizona, and I saw Randy Stark shoot a pole kick. I thought it was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
And I became really good friends with Randy, and Randy said, oh, mine's nothing. You got to see from the Bay Area named Thor who shoots it with the wrist, right? So fast forward a few years later, I go to this tournament with Thor. He and I end up beating Bacon and Bowers for winners of the winners bracket in that tournament.
Seriously?
We also went through, just so you know, in that tournament, Thor and I went through Spear and Maloney. We went through Scott Stewart, Bert Argon, Chris Doobie, and Tina Rotan. There was some good teams there. And also the Guinness Book of Worlds was at that tournament to take stats for their book.
Wow.
And they took the stats in the finals, and I still remember the numbers, and they're totally misleading, but we lost the finals. Needless to say, we got dipped by Bacon and Bowers, but in that final, Thor went 1 for 29 in the finals against Bowers. Now that sounds atrocious, right? But the bottom line is there was plenty of times when Thor shot a dink and Bowers jumped all the way across the goal, but that dink hit the wall. Or there was times where Bowers sat still and Thor shot the long, and this was on a dynamo table, and on that table, Thor's shot would come up off the table surface and it would hit the top of the goal sometimes. So the stats were a little bit misleading. And I didn't do that bad on Bacon. If I remember right, that book said maybe I did for 19 in the first game and 5 for 22. Bacon scored on me the second game. So he didn't light me up by any means, but go with $90 in my pocket and I think maybe winning $600-700. I was hooked. I was hooked. You know, that was it. You know, and the rest is history, so they say. But that's my first experience.
How many players can say they went to their first tournament like that and did so well? That's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah. It was definitely, looking back on it, I didn't realize the magnitude of it at the time, being a semi-pro player and first of all having opportunity to play with somebody like Thor. I had no idea who he was or his stature in the game or anything like that. So, but I will tell you this, guys. That Saturday night after we won the winner's bracket, I called up Randy Stark, and I said, "Hey, guess what, Randy? I'm playing with Thor Donovan in a tournament, and we just beat Bowers and Bacon." So, yeah.
Amazing.
Needless to say, I was hooked. And I will tell you something else that's kind of funny about that tournament. The lights went out, the power went out at that tournament, and after it was out for about 30 minutes, most of the players had found their way outside. And it was dark. I mean, it wasn't like we didn't have cell phones back then to light up anything. And the inside of that place was freaking dark, okay? And back then, we all used to use rosin. And you used to throw your rosin underneath the table.
Yep.
And about 30 minutes into the power outage, the lights came back on. And lo and behold, Chris Doobie and Adrian Zamora are on the ground under the table. And they've got about half a dozen rosin each that they've collected that they're going to pick up. And they're going to... So yeah, they got busted with the lights on.
Dude, that's really weird imagery.
Yeah.
Adrian and Doobie under a foosball table with rosin.
Collecting them.
Really weird. So weird. Dude.
So you came up, that Northern
so many things like Thor Donovan. Anyone asked me?
Yeah.
You want to cut me off again, Jim?
No,
Let me just say
you
this.
go ahead.
I love
I'll
Thor
cut you
Donovan.
off later.
Thor Donovan is my
Balls.
favorite player of all time. He's my favorite player. I love that. I didn't know this story. I never heard this story. Anyone asked me, who's your favorite player? I say Thor Donovan. Most people have never heard of him. And I just say, look, Thor Donovan, you don't know if he's practicing or playing a pickup game. He's probably the last greatest wrist pull kick you will ever see. Because dinks, and he's a lefty. His 5-bar. I mean, the guy had some weaknesses in his game, but didn't matter. The attitude, the charisma, just a great guy. I love that story. Jim, please go pick up. I cut you off. Go ahead. Man, what were you gonna say?
I think I cut you off actually, but no, I was just agreeing with you. It was so much fun. Such a great guy off the table and such an intense player on the table. A lot of fun to watch. And Dana, you kind of grew up in that Northern California area with players like Adrian Zamora, Scott Stewart, Steve Corioso, Phil Schlafer, Chris Doobie, Thor Donovan, etc.
Yeah.
Mark
were
Puha, who had maybe the hardest ball kick of all time. Chad Whips came along later, and these were great players up there in that area. Of course, I was in Southern California at the time. I came up to Northern California a few times. I think you and I met in the early 1980s up there.
Let me stop you for just a second there, Jim, because my first memory of you is hilarious, and I don't think anybody knows this, but you used to come around. You used to come around, Jim, and it's so funny to me that you make your living right now as a fooscaster, somebody who talks for a living. When you played in foosball tournaments up there, you never said 2 words to anybody. You had your baseball hat pulled down halfway across the bridge of your nose. You couldn't even see you. You had long hair sticking out of that hat, and you never said 2 words to anybody ever.
Yeah, it's so true.
You just came, you played foosball, and now you make your living talking. The irony of it all.
No, it's so true. It really was. I mean, I took it seriously. And when we went up to NorCal, of course, you guys were our rivals. And no, it was all business for me. And I was kind of shy by nature back then anyway. I don't know what happened. But really, you've told me that story before. And and thank you for remembering. Not everybody remembered me from those days as a player because I was kind of quiet, kind of unobtrusive, and would have some success here and there. But thank you for that. But it was tough. You really came up in an era with some great players up there. And you chose to be primarily a goalie, although you're a very good forward as well. And that was kind of a good choice, an interesting choice. And man, I'm guessing the weekly DYPs up there, or the monthly draw, bring your partners, were probably a lot of fun and really competitive.
Oh yeah, the weekly draw your partners at Galaxy Game Room, one of the places I played. It wasn't uncommon for there to be 30 teams on a Friday night.
Wow.
It wasn't an uncommon thing at all. And what you said about the pull kickers, we had Thor, we had Marv, we had Doobie. And it just cracked me up when I would go out on tour and play a pull kicker. I mean, I was just so at home. I thought, there's just, this guy has no clue. Right? I got to deal with Thor. I got to deal with Marv. I got to deal with Doobie. 3 completely different, all 3 totally different style pull kicks. But I always felt at home. I wish we would have had a few more push kickers, but yeah, the pull kicks never bothered me.
So we had Northern California was known before experts were known as novices. That was the title. They weren't called experts; they were called novices.
Yeah.
And Northern California was known as the hotbed for the best novices in the world. And really, we had Rich Lopez, we had Chris Lawson, we had Dana Maher. And Dana, I met Dana probably end of 88, 89 when I was a rookie. There was a $5,000 California State tournament at Galaxy Games, and Dana won novice singles. That was like 89. And so Dana was between Dana and then Fernando. And Dana became a pro very quickly, and then Fernando was a novice. But these guys dominated the novice stuff for as long as they were novice players. They dominated it. Now, getting to the next level was a whole other can of worms, and very few people did that besides Adrian, Terry Moore in Southern California. When I say getting to the next level, winning more than a state or a regional, getting to the finals of majors. But Dan, I'll ask you this question because I got a narrow a view before the 90s. Who was the best player from Northern California that either quit playing or could have done much more and didn't get it done? Who do you think was the highest potential player that we never saw reach their potential?
That's a tough one. That's a tough one, but even though he's shown some greatness on tour, I don't think he reached his maximum potential, and I would have to say Serge there. You know, he's a great player, but he's always put his family first. He's always had his priorities in line, and he never really dedicated the time to practice and to tour regularly. But I think he had a ton of potential. I do. But like I said, he's got his priorities a little bit more in order than the rest of us do. So family always came first with him, but I'd probably put him on that list.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, the one thing about a great goalie... One thing about a great goalie, Mark, is that they can have an impact on a game, on a match. You know, that they're not just sitting back there in a support role. Oftentimes, they are hitting that big shot from goal. They're making the big blocks on the big points. And Dana's one of those guys. Dana is a guy that really can have an impact. And right up until recent years, when we've seen him out on tour, playing with Serge or playing with others, that you've had such a big impact. And the other thing I've always noticed about you, Dana Maher, is it seems like each year when I see you, it's like you've added something. You've tried out something, and obviously you've practiced it a lot. Whether it was Banks when Banks started to come back into vogue, or whatever it might have been. Is that something you've kind of focused on during an off season or even during the course of a season, where you're adding something and then really working hard on it to perfect it? In order to stay kind of, up there as one of the great goalies, as an impact player, as we talked about. Is that something you've focused on over the years?
It is, Jim. I had to. Like I said before, I wasn't the most physically talented person, so I would watch a lot of tape. I would pick out things that I, from goalies that I thought were good, and I would try and take a page out of their book. It also seemed like the more I played the same people over and over again, and the things that I would do, I used to do a fast wall pass on the top wall, and for the first couple years I did it, I just killed people with it. And then everybody, little by little, they got onto it, and I had to start doing a little brush when they'd get over there, something that would go with the 5 bar up to the 3 bar. But there was a lot of little things that I would just see somebody do, and I thought, hey, man, that would be a really nice little wrinkle to add to go with. But I was always very methodical about trying to have a game plan, things that worked well with each other. And those were things that I learned. Most of the foosball that I learned from about 3 different people. Todd and Rob Mares are the 2 people that have probably taught me the most about the game. And I will also put Scott Stewart in that category, even though he didn't teach me. I learned from him. He wasn't a great teacher, he was a good player. And I would have put him on that list, Mark, that you asked me about as far as potential goes. He never had the head game for it. Slop would get to him. He'd be out of his game, things like that. So it takes a strong mental game to get up there to be a world champion, and to reach the top level of the game too. But those things, just the way that Todd and the way that Robbie taught me and told me things. And now keep in mind, I used to room with Rob Maher, Scott Weidman, and Grant Nelson. The 4 of us probably for 2 years, stayed together. And I would go with those guys, and I'd be playing in the tournament, and I'd be out in 2 or out in 3, and we're back in the room, and these guys about how they're going to play each other for 5th or better the next day, and this and that. And I wanted so bad to be a part of that. So much so that I finally told Robbie, I'm tired of this, man. What do I got to do to get better? And the dude, like, at that time, it wasn't common, it was believed that there was foosball secrets, that you didn't share things like that. And Rob was totally open. I want to say kind of took me on his wing a little bit, and taught me things that were so basic about the game that I'd just never been introduced to. And it started me on just a snowball path, things going,
Very cool. Very cool. So, Dana, on another aspect of this, when it comes to competition, of course, as you were coming up the ranks, was there one person, another goalie, let's say, that you considered your direct rival? Who would that have been?
No doubt about that one. That would be Bob Diaz.
Yeah?
Okay. Yeah, there's just no doubt about that, because he and I have had our different tasks. It's, it's come to nose several times,
I remember one of those pretty clearly, and it wasn't that long ago in Las Vegas.
Yeah, there's been several of them, Jim, that you've been witness to, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But as I get older, I have less of a temper. I think Mark Torres probably remembers when I reached across the table at a Keystone Arcade tournament and tore the shirt off of T.S. Tom. Do you remember that, Mark?
T.S. Tom.
I do. That's not the only. I remember a lot of things. Go ahead, Dana. Tell your story. Then I got some stuff about Dana. Go ahead, Dana.
Yeah, I forget exactly what happened, but he riled me up so much that I didn't even bother walking around the table to sock him in his nose. I just reached over across the table and I grabbed onto his shirt. And T.S. Tom was probably, I'm guessing, 260,
he was a big guy,
something like that.
He was a big Southern California.
And I grabbed a handful of shirt and I tried to pull the table, and all I got was his shirt. And yeah, that's pretty much when everybody else grabbed onto me. But that's not the only time that something like that happened to me. I used to be a little bit of a hothead in my younger days.
I used to be a little bit of a hothead. Oh my God! All right, so you hear? Okay, Dana Maher, very soft-spoken.
Yeah.
Very methodical. I could speak for Dana 25 years ago. You do not want to piss off Dana Maher. Okay,
correct.
Dana Maher is a black belt in Jeet Kune Do from East San Jose, who, if he got the impression that you were being disrespectful or insulting, you better watch out, because I've seen Dana and Scott Stewart almost get nuts. I've seen Dana and James Barrero almost get. Why is it always Dana? It's always Dana and somebody. But Dana, in his defense, he wasn't necessarily the instigator or agitator. But he would not. It would be like, it could be incendiary in seconds. It's like, oh crap, it's happening, and people had to get in the middle of stuff, and that's just kind of how things went down. So ultimately, there was a couple of guys you didn't mess around with, and you just like, hey man, Dana's respectful. He's got the martial arts code. Like I said, I took kung fu lessons with Dana. Dana Maher was my kung fu instructor for a very short time in the 90s. Yeah, he's a black belt in Jeet Kune Do. Be like water, and it's amazing that Dana talks about. He's admittedly not the most gifted foozer, and his personality manifests in the way he plays foosball. Completely cerebral, absolutely calculated. A, B, and a backdoor plan for C. How he has and I love this too, because we don't have it much of it anymore. You heard me talk about this, the 70s, how I heard about the 70s and people having books. And Dana is one of those guys who has a book. He's a librarian on his competitors. Dana, I'm talking a lot, dude. I don't want to steal your thunder. It's your show. I want to hear about you and how your approach to foosball as a tactician.
Well, that's a tough one. I always try to get better, but because I didn't have that physical talent, there was things that I practiced a lot, man. Probably more than most people, other than Robbie. But oftentimes I would practice 6-8 hours a day for 4 or 5 days a week, just working on certain things. And then when I started teaching people, I really realized how much good that did for me. It brought back basics that I had forgotten about. And I was, I was fortunate throughout my career to be able to teach different players at different levels. And each time I did it, it brought my game up. I did it early on with some lower ranked players from the Bay Area, Darren and Karen and Paul Richards, guys like that. But later on, I want to say it was maybe 2001 when Tony Sprademan packed up that he owned from Wisconsin and drove across the United States to move in with me when he was 7 years old. And at that time, the reason that he did that, I'll go back just a little bit further. The year that he came to Las Vegas and he I want to say won like maybe 5 events when he was 17, along with placing in the top 5, I think, in open doubles. And I was I couldn't believe this kid was dressed in all had this goofy beanie on his head. And he's playing, I think at the time he was playing with Tin Man, one of those Wisconsin Dairy Thugs. Pretty sure it was Tin Man.
Dairy Thugs?
But yeah, the Dairy Thugs, that's what I called them all. But after that tournament, I went up to him. Tony was an amateur or a rookie or something. And I think I was a master at that point. And the tournament was over. It's Sunday night. Everybody around by the bar, and Tony's kind of off a little ways away from the bar because he's only 17 years old. And I went up to him and I introduced myself and I said, if you ever want a master to play goalie for you, and I said, here's my phone number. And it wasn't probably 2 months after that I got a phone call from him after he had done a little research. A big influence in his life at that time was Terry Moore because of where he was living, and he would go play in Chicago and Terry was there. And I think he might have asked around a little bit to find out because he didn't know me at all. But I think he might have got a little bit of information that said, hey, this guy might be able to teach you a thing or two. And come to find out, I really couldn't teach him anything about offense, but I did teach him about defense. And out of all the people I've ever taught my whole life in this game, Tony picked it up quicker than anybody. But also in that same time when he lived with me, there was plenty of nights, you guys, that I played with Tony for 5-6 hours.
Jeez.
And did not win not one game in that 5 or 6 hour time. But if you watch Tony's defense and you know the way that I teach, it's very reflective. I'm a big believer in there's some things that people have wrong in the game. One of them is the fact that when you get the ball on the 3 bar, you're expected to score. But let's just break it down for a second mathematically. And Mark, you touched on it a little bit earlier. If you very simply break down the goal and you say there are 3 holes, a straight, a middle, and a long, and you have 2 men. So if you stay in good position, mathematically speaking, 66% chance of blocking, right? Whereas it should be mathematically much more difficult to block a pass on a 5 bar. You only have a 50% chance there. They have a lane and a wall. You only have 1 man. So statistically and mathematically, you stand a better chance of blocking the ball in the goal if you have good man position. And then if you take it a little step further and you base it on the skill level of your opponent and who can actually go dead man, who's going to do that to you? Guys like Billy, guys like Tony. Tommy could do it a little bit, but most guys aren't going to beat you in a 3 out of 5 match. So you cheat that goal a little bit more. And now you're making them hit perfect holes everywhere, and you find out what somebody's capable of and what they're not. And that goes back to one of the things I learned from Stuart that he didn't even know he taught me, and that was to find somebody's weakness and exploit it. And if you have a methodical pattern in your defense and you have a series of things that you're going to go through, then once you get to a certain one, I call it the unmasking. It's happened with every forward that I've ever played in a big match. There's a point in time that forward knows what he can and cannot do. He likes to keep it a secret, but there's a point in time when you say, okay, and my point in time was with Terry Moore, one of the best unmaskings ever. I'm playing him in a big, might have been with Scipiora. But I'd heard before that at the big points that Terry liked in the push side. And I watched him to see if this was true. And sure enough, it seemed to be holding true maybe 80-85% of the time.
Little tell.
So,
yeah, little tell. Yeah. Keep going. I'm listening. Yeah.
Big T gets the, it's his drop, and he gets the ball. He does his up pass. It's 3-3 in the 5th game, I think. And I'm not coming off the push side. He's going to score a pull or he's going to score a middle on me, but he's not going to score a push. And sat on it. I sat on it, and I sat on it. And back then, I had a good feeling for his timing. He liked that 6 to 8 second period, the rock, and then he liked to deliver it around 6 or 8 seconds. And I sat on that push side for 6 seconds and just shook it just a little bit. Flicked it like I was going to move, but I didn't move it, and he shot it right into my man. I trapped the ball, and I looked up at him, and he looked up at me. And that's the unmasking right there where I say, okay, I just pulled your pants down, pal. I know what you got now.
I love that.
And that was, that was pretty much, that's the way I learned and how I went about things. And if you take that a little step further, if you were to watch a forward before a match, say you're going to play a match against him, and he's warming up ahead of time, there's so much information to be gained right there watching somebody warm up in the way that they, I'll use a pull shooter, for example. Say the pull shooter sets the men up in a dead man, and he's stroking his long around the 2 bar. If I see that before the match, that's not the defense I'm going to give him. That's what he likes. He wants that sight post to go around. He's not going to see that defense from me. But that's information that I could gain before the match ever started. And those were the ways that I would win, because people are willing to give up small little tidbits of information without ever knowing it. The same as when I'm playing goalie and the other team, we'll take a timeout when I have the ball in the back, and the other team will leave their men down, all 4 men down. Be to look at for 30 seconds and see, when it's so easy just to lift your men up, right? It's a small, subtle thing, but if you're going to leave them down for 30 seconds when I have the ball and it's my shot, you can bet you're behind that I'm going to get to the end of the table and look where those holes are.
Yeah.
If you're silly enough to leave those men down for that 30 seconds when nobody's ever taught you on every single timeout, you put your men in the air. It's just common sense,
Interesting point.
Yeah.
So
we actually have a caller, someone who'd like to speak to you. I believe, Lewis, are you on the line with FoosTalk Live? Would you like to speak to Dana?
I am. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Absolutely.
Louis, King Louis.
Hey, Dana. As always, I always join in this late because I always forget it starts at 6 p.m. But I had a couple things I wanted to say, and I had a question for you, Dana.
All right, shoot.
Anyway, one of the biggest things that I ever noticed about your game, your biggest strength was, in my opinion, consistency. But you had a habit, and I don't know if it was scripted sometimes or sometimes it just came out from your spirit, your soul, whatever. But when you were in a tight situation with your partner, you would rise up to the challenge. Like, it was visibly, for me anyway, I could see that it was visible that you were rising up, you were taking the challenge. You're like, hey, let's go. Let's, almost like you were saying earlier, let's go out to the parking lot, but you were doing it on the table. And I think one of your biggest weaknesses as a team was your partner did not always join you in that challenge. And I thought about that many times over the years. If you had the right partner who rose up to the challenge like you did, and like I said, you could tell me, I assume sometimes it was scripted because it seemed like maybe you were trying to put an effect on the table, but the times when it wasn't and it just came out like a tiger or whatever, if you had the right partner at those moments, I think that you would have gone a lot further. You just needed a partner that wanted the challenge, faced the challenge like you did.
Yeah.
So real quick, first, did you ever script those?
No, but you're pretty accurate in what you're saying, though. And I can look back, and there's a few balls here and there, and I'll give you a great example right now. Fernando and I playing Todd and Frederico for winners of the winners bracket at Worlds, I think in maybe 98. And this was before we had sudden death. And this match came down to 4-all 5th game, Fernando's drop.
Wow.
He drops it in. He makes a really nice pass. And he's got it towed up for a front pin. And he rocks it a couple times. And it squirts out. Ooh. And it lands on Frederico's 3-bar. Oh. Okay? Squirts out backwards and lands on Rico's 3-bar. Rico didn't score that point to win. Todd ended up scoring it from the back. But there's been several instances like that where one ball or one slight little thing with my partner in the difference in a couple of majors for me. Like when we played that final, Ron Scipior and I against Bobby and Terry in those, Ron Scipior's hand was so torn open that he had to go upstairs before the match and put this stuff on called new skin.
Oh.
And he put the hair dryer to it on the palm of his hand because it was all torn up. And the whole time I'm thinking, and this is no disrespect to Ron, but this was my mentality. I'm thinking, let that damn thing bleed all over the place. This is the world. Months to heal after this. Let's get this title, And it was just, there's little things like that. I actually played with Terry Moore one time. Only once have I ever played with Terry. And I will have you know that one of the categories I have written down here is worst partners ever. Johnny Horton and Terry Moore are the two in that category. And they're both basically for the same reason. But I practiced more with Terry Moore than I practiced for anybody. I was so forward to that. And I was on the top of my game, and I played really good. And we were playing against Bobby and somebody else. And I don't even remember who it was. But Terry was getting shut down by Bobby. And in that same tournament, I had just played Bobby in singles and lit him up, maybe 3 straight, maybe 3-1. I beat him. And I had no problem scoring on Bobby. At that time, I was shooting a front pin that was set all the way on the push side. And some people had a really hard time with it. But I pleaded with Terry after about 6 or 7 block shots in a big game. I just pleaded with him, please let me get up there. Please just let me take a shot, And he just wouldn't have no part of it. It was very, very much the same as Horton, So, and Horton was super doubles. I played in super doubles with Horton at the time that I was staying with Rob, Scotty, and Grant, and we're playing and Scotty for like third place or something, me and Horton. And I know these guys' games so well. That's back when the Colorado Clear was still in effect, when I knew they were going to hit the ball off the table. I knew the game better than they did. And I couldn't tell Horton anything. He wouldn't listen to me about anything. We could have waxed them guys 3 straight had he just listened to me a little bit. So there was plenty of little opportunities throughout my career where I say, man, I missed it by that much, So many of them that I can look back on. The whole reason that I was playing goalie in the first place, when I first started playing this game forward, and I actually won a California State Championship with a guy named Dan Casey, and with me playing forward. But I got so fed up with being a forward and looking back there and watching the forward on the other team shoot, and not only knowing where he was going to shoot the ball, but when he was going to shoot it. And it just drove me bonkers, man, that my goalie couldn't get on it. And so finally I said, you know what? I'll get back there. I don't care if we play for a 2-hour match. We're going to win because I ain't going to let this guy score. So, I went to 23 World Championships before I ever got to a final. It's not true. I think I played in one with Alex Pipkin, 35-17 once, but 23 years I go to the Worlds playing goalie. In the 24th year, I go with my brother, guy I love to death, Steve Corioso, says, I'll play goalie for you. And Steve, in my opinion, is in my category. I also have another category for most underrated goalies. And Steve Corioso is the male. Christina Fuchs is the other one in that category. But Steve Corioso was underrated. He could do everything well.
Yeah.
In that tournament that we played, we had to go through Lafredo to win that tournament, and that was early on in the bracket, maybe our second match, and I still had a little bit of jitters. And I'll never forget this. Steve held me up. He blew 8 shots from Lafredo. And another little tidbit on that one was that was right when Todd was staying with me for a little bit, and I talked about game situations with him, 4-4 situations, and we're in the first game and it's 4-4 and it's Todd's drop, and he takes a timeout. And he had told me not more than a month before that he liked 2 passes in that situation, either the rear or the hesitation wall, were the 2 passes that he liked in that situation. And when he called time in and he stepped back up to the table, I looked at him and I said, "What's it going to be, Duke? Is it going to be the runner or the hesitation?" And he goes, "That's messed up, man. You can't do that." That's what he says to me.
See?
But if you want to know the truth, he tried the runner and I spiked it and I won that game. Shot the pull kick and won that game. But he did try the runner. But yeah, so
Yeah, for those of you,
that.
for those of you who don't know, that's of course our caller is the Hall of Famer Lewis Cartwright, calling us from Las Vegas. And I know, Lewis, your career goes back to about the late '80s. Dana was a factor back then in California, and then through, of course, the '90s on the Pro Tour. What were your impressions of Dana Maher, both as a person and as a player, once you got to know him and then competed against him during that decade?
I'll tell you right now, they weren't good. I can tell you that I asked Lewis to play with me several times, and he very politely turned me down every time. You know, I thought, man, we both have good defense, we have decent offense, but I asked Lewis to play with me several times.
Lewis, you there?
Oh, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my first impression of Dana goes back to his story of going out to the parking lot, sort of, but it wasn't with me.
See?
Yeah, Lewis has definitely been a witness to some of my finer moments.
Dana's like, why didn't you want to play with me? And Lewis is like, because you're a serial killer. Why do I want to play with you? Anyway, go ahead, Dana. Go ahead, Lewis. All right.
Dana, you remember Joe Bergen, right?
Very well.
Smoking Joe.
I was getting into it with Smoking Joe while you were playing with him.
That's my first memory of you. Well, actually, and then my first memory, I think Joe was a hothead too, and I remember we were losing.
I was just going to say that in my defense, Joey feisty himself.
Oh, Joe was bad. Joe, there was, yeah. But anyway, that was my first memory of you. The rest of it was you were just a steady, solid goalie, very nice guy who I heard a lot of bad things about, but never really witnessed them. And my ending of it was, like I said, the competitiveness that I learned about you, that I always felt you needed a partner to step up with you. But I mean, I don't have any bad memories of you. Just that first time when I thought you were going to kick Joe's ass. But
again, influence on the whole partner thing for me. When I talked to Todd about, put the question to him, what's more important, Todd, when you pick a partner? Is it their skill level or the chemistry that you have? And he immediately went to Gil Jackson and said, explain to me that it was the chemistry. And so I always figured that there was times when I could have played with better play I did, but it got to a point where if I was going in a big tournament, I wanted to do it with somebody that I liked, and so for that reason, that's why I picked the partners that I did. And like one of the categories that I have written down here are favorite partners. And I'll tell you right now that my all-time favorite partner was Tony. I'll never play with him, I don't think. And for one specific reason, he and I won super doubles here in California in 2014 and in 2015. And in 2015, we were playing against Scott Stewart and James Castillo. And Tony was passing the ball. And so me as a goalie, I'm on that top side protecting our side of the goal, right? And Tony shoots a 5-bar shot. This is how much faster Tony is than me. He shoots the 5-bar shot, happens to run into James's 5-bar, and the ball spikes back in my goal before I can even move my men from the top corner protecting that goal, thinking Tony's going to pass. It all happened so fast that the ball went in my goal. And at that point, I realized, hey, man, I've definitely lost a step in this game. So for that reason, I'll probably never play with Tony again. But I would like to mention my favorite partners, though, since we're at that point. Tony was my all-time favorite, just because he's like a son to me. He always has been. I love him to death. But I got on my favorite partners, I got Adrian, Serge, Rob Mares, Tommy Atkinson. I played with Tommy Atkinson one time, and we won under 5 matches straight. We won 15 games in a row, and it was a joy to play with him. I haven't had that much fun. And then I got to put Thor on that list, but one guy that I got to play with one time, and if I did come back and play again, I would love one more opportunity to play with him because his talent just blew me away. I'd seen it, but never being on the side of the table with him, and that was Trevor Park. And man, I'd give anything to play with him one more time. And then, with that same thing, there's 2 people that I've never played with that I'd like to. Terry Rue is one of them. I'd really like to play with that guy. And I've never got to play open doubles with Todd. I've played some specialty events with him before. But those two guys, Terry and Tyler, are the two guys that I'd like to play with that I never have. And if I could, guys, just real quick, I'd like to do a little honorable mention on some goalies here that I couldn't get onto the list that I think are great players.
Sure.
Steve Corioso is on that list, along with being one of the most underrated. Also, you guys remember Daniel Smith. And when I first saw Daniel Smith, I've never seen anybody pass the ball with such velocity to their partner. The way him and John had that man hanging down, and he would just shoot it like a shot. So I got to give props to him. Here's another guy you guys are going to laugh at, but because I believe, okay, so let me stop right here just for a second and tell you what I think, what makes a good goalie, okay? If somebody was to ask you, what's the goalie's job? I think 9 out of 10 people, their job is to block. When in my opinion, in the way that I've taught people, that's way down about 4th on the list. And I'll go through it real quick. The goalie's first job is to be able to corral the ball. If you can't stop the ball from hitting the back wall and coming out of your area, you're worthless back there. Okay? The second thing is you got to be able to block the slot. Slow rollers to the goal, you've got to be able to stop those. The third thing is you got to be able to clear the ball. You got to be able to get it past the other guy's 5 bar. Now, if you just do these 3 things and those 3 things only, your forward might have to pass and score every time to win, but at least you're not going to take him out of the game. Okay, so, and then 4th on that list would be blocking, and maybe 5th would be the score or 2 every now and then. But honorable mention, next on that list is Arthur the Axe Mitchell. And I've always been impressed with Arthur's game for one reason. You cannot light the guy up. He will make adjustments, and he's smart. He's a great goalie all around. The only thing that he lacks is some offensive power. If he could get the ball out of there a little bit better, a little bit more effective, he would be one of those top goalies because he's really smart and he plays the position well. So he's on my honorable mention along with Tina Roton, Anthony Nagy, Carl Miller, Ricky Benitez, and Chuck Pistol. They're all for different
Chuck Pistol.
Chuck Pistol. He was one of the guys that first brought out that tuck, man. He was awesome at shooting that tuck, and it was a zone breaker back then.
Dude, the last time I played at World Champ at the Worlds, Chuck was my goalie. We took 9th in open doubles at the Worlds. It was all Chuck bricking people. It was amazing. Anyway, go ahead.
Definitely, he gets the honorable mention there for sure for certain things that he did. Nagy too. Nagy was kind of, Nagy, he never took the game that serious, never really practiced, but had a ton of potential, I mean, I watched him play with Thor sometimes and carry Thor when Thor would struggle, Nagy'd put in 2 or 3 from the back. That was with a back pin on Dynamo, But, yeah, just some of those guys, him, Carl Miller, Ricky Benitez, just guys that influenced me that I like the way that they played because they did all of those things well. And Jim touched on it earlier. One of the things I didn't mention that I think goes without saying is the goalie's job is to set the pace in the game. I've always taught people, if you're losing a game to a momentum player, like who's a momentum player? Tommy Atkinson, Fernando, those guys are momentum players. And it would I would literally grab partner. If the ball flew off the table against somebody like Tommy, partner went to go get that ball, I would literally grab onto their shirt and say, you stand right here and let somebody else get that ball. We're in no hurry to get it back on the table. You know, they're momentum players. So just over the years. I would just
keep kicking. You walk up to it and kick that ball out of the room.
I've seen you do that before, Mark. You're listening to FoosTalk Live on a Sunday night, January 10th, 2021. We're joined by, of course, the outstanding goalie from Northern California, Dana Maher. Dana, a guy that began his career in the 80s and then on through the 90s, into the 2000s, the 2010s, where you've had some success. Looking back on your career, what in your mind is your biggest win, your biggest moment in your individual career? What is the one thing you look back on and say, I am the most proud of that achievement in the sport of table soccer?
I do have one. It's not that big of a moment, but it meant a ton to me at the time. Thor and I were playing in the California State Championships, and we were the defending champions. and we were in the finals against Dan Drexler and Garrett. And again, this is back in the day when there's no extra time. When it comes down to 4-all fifth, it's all over at that point. The next point wins. And this was a dynamo table, and I'd been shooting a pull shot the entire tournament from the back, and mostly trying to feed the ball to Thor with a little pull kick here and there, just my usual stuff. And Thor was struggling at that point. 4-all fifth game, I set it up for a pull shot on the 2-bar, and I pulled it almost over to the near wall, and I shot the inside bank, which broke their zone, went through the 5-bar, and scored. And I didn't even know what to do at that point. Those guys were reaching over the table to shake hands. Thor was hugging me. I didn't know what was going on. I just know that we had won the tournament, and I did it from the back.
Wow.
Yeah. Thor didn't have to carry. I did it on my own, So that was one of my proudest moments ever.
That's awesome.
I got a comment and then a question for you, Dana. My comment is, so Dana tried to develop me, and he was a mentor for me. Unfortunately, it was during a time when I was already coming out. I was going into college, and I was not coachable. But Dana tried anyway, because that was what was in his.
You're still not coachable.
Yeah, he was trying to help players that could improve. And we look for teachable moments, Dana. And I want to go back to one thing briefly. When you talked about the unmasking, we have a lot of expert and amateur players that listen to the show and look for those tidbits. And I think the one thing that I learned from Dana that was great was that I used to come up to a table as an amateur, and if I was playing or a pro or a master player, I made the assumption that they did everything well. And it was Dana who tried to make me understand that not only do masters and pros at any level have natural weaknesses, they have situational weaknesses. So that on this particular Saturday, they may be favoring the pull side versus the push side, because on this particular Saturday, it's what's working for them and they don't have confidence in it. And what Dana is able to do, because he's methodical about his approach, he's able to create an algorithm and narrow it down. And he spoke this earlier. What's the nuance? What am I seeing? And very rapidly, within the course of a handful of possessions, he's able to say, this guy's down, has an issue this weekend, and I'm going to give that to him, and it's going to give me that block I need to feed. That's a critical thing for rookies, amateurs, and experts to understand about advanced goalie play. Identify the weakness, you can do it, and believe in it. And then you go a step further with someone like Lewis. Lewis will make up stuff that he believes in that doesn't even exist. I don't know if Lewis still listening. So Lewis will tell you someone has a tell that doesn't even exist, but he believes it so strongly, it's a reality for him. That's a whole nother universe. But Dana, you left. I want to focus. I want to focus on one thing with you, Dana. The international play and the World Cup play, and the tournaments that are happening overseas that ingratiate themselves to the Americans coming over and qualifying for them. I love seeing the elder statesmen like you and Ken Alwell. And in my romantic mind, you guys qualify and go play and still represent the United States. Is that something you ever think about? Playing in the World Cup on the classic side?
It's funny that you say that, Mark, because I qualified, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago I qualified. And let me say this first. I quit playing the game. I continued to play the game after it was no longer fun for me because of the friends. I would go to tournaments to see my friends. But Adrian and I played and we qualified. And I qualified to go and play in, I think it was Nantes. I'm not sure, but I did qualify, and at the time it was kind of a big deal to me, but the more I thought about it and the more I realized what a big deal it was to other people, I kind of realized that all I was doing was taking up a spot with a mediocre attitude from somebody that really had the desire to go there and play. Now, looking back on it, I don't think it was a good choice. I miss the experience, especially when I hear my friends talk about it, Adrian in particular, and Rob. I wish I would have made the decision to commit and go there, but it just wasn't in the cards, and I felt like I was taking a spot away from somebody who deserved it a little bit more than me. If I had it to do over again, I probably would have jumped on that plane just for the experience. But it's definitely one of my regrets, that I never got to be
there's still time for you, though. Still time for you, maybe to qualify for the senior team and just to experience that whole experience of international play. Just a few minutes left here tonight. I wanted to bring up, back, I don't know whether it was 1998 or so, you did some interviews for us with Tournament Soccer, or rather with Inside Foods.
Yeah, that was a great time, Jim.
Yeah.
I enjoyed the hell out of that.
Yeah, it was fun. I think it was down in Atlanta, and he was interviewing people, all the big stars. We've got interviews with Terry Moore and others, and that was something you kind of embraced, something you were interested in. You were interested in doing other things besides playing foosball. I know you also did it. You handled a camera for us down at the Super Doubles event in Austin. Deep in the Pits is something that I know you participated in, and that was something that really interested you, really before social media, before YouTube, etc. Talk a little bit about your experiences with that.
Well, the whole thing that started that, Jim, was I was kind of like, I had played foosball with these guys for years, but I realized that I didn't know what any of them did outside of foosball. I had no idea that Dave Gummison was, a manager at Target. I didn't know that Cindy Head was a cop. I didn't know any of that stuff, and I just found it fascinating. Steve Biney, like, you walked a beat in a terrible part of town, and that kind of thing was fascinating to me, so I figured that it would be equally as interesting to the other people, that see these guys 3-4 times a year at majors, don't really know anything about them other than their foosball game. And I just thought it was kind of cool to have them open up a little bit and talk about something, along with foosball, but part of their personal lives too. How they made their money. What else did they do for fun, It was interesting to me to find out.
Yeah, and it was really good and a lot of fun for all of us who watched it. As we wind things down, you guys got anything else for Dana tonight?
Well, first of all, I'm just you've answered just about every question I was going to ask you to begin with. So thanks for anticipating, Dana. I always want to ask other goalies, especially masters like yourself, like the top 3 mistakes that rookies make in the goal. But you already did that, so I'm good. Yeah.
Probably one of the biggest mistakes that goalies make is moving both rods at the same time. Okay. A good goalie will only move one rod at a time, unless it's the Louis shuffle. Really, only one rod moves, and the reason for that is because once somebody becomes a good shooter, part of being a good shooter is having good timing. So if you're going to move both rods at the same time, it's just so much easier to time rather than moving one. And then, of course, incorporating a flick in there along with the movement, too. But I think that's one of the biggest mistakes. The biggest, in my opinion, is something that Mark already touched on, and that's being in position, over blocking. There's no reason to never want your man to be completely in front of the ball. You only want a part of that ball to hit the edge of your foot, so that it can't go in the goal. But that's definitely the biggest mistake is guys are out of position. And the sad thing about it is there's graphics on the table that I could show you in a matter of 5 minutes, the way that the arc works with the dead man's and the way that the goalie box works with the foot of the goalie. And there's just some graphics on the table that will allow you to be in position all the time. And it's very, very simple.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Lewis came back to ask one more thing, or maybe get one more last dig in. Lewis?
If he's going to ask me to play, is he going to ask me to play finally?
Yeah.
Actually, Dana, I would play with you in the senior thing at the World Cup. But anyway, I know they're running out of time. The other question I had earlier, didn't you play forward for a year on tour? And if you did, who was it with and why did you do it? I faintly remember that. I remember you passed extremely well on me when you played forward.
I don't remember who. Nagy played goalie for me for a little while, but I don't remember doing it out on tour as much as locally. I think that some of the things that you're remembering might have been like tournaments, or maybe when you came to our part of town. But I only did it for a little while. And there was only a few people that would actually take me on as a forward because I was really known as a goalie. That tournament that I won in Cal with Dan Casey, I asked the guy for 2 weeks to play with me. And I was not going to play in the tournament. The day before the tournament, he finally said yes. And I want to say we played Adrian in the finals of that. And, there was something more satisfying to me about winning the goal. There's you don't get the recognition, But anybody who knows about sports knows that defense wins matches. Even though it's not as obvious on the table, it's always what has won matches.
Dana, we got 2 minutes, so I got to ask now while Luce is on here. Can I set you guys up to play together in the senior doubles in Vegas so you guys could win that tournament, and then I could watch you guys play in France?
That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Lewis, you there?
I would agree.
All right, Dana, are you ready? You ready?
Who's playing forward there, though? Who's playing forward at this stage?
I think I don't want to be crude, but I think I could see them winning in either way. I could see them being a perfect hybrid team.
Well,
yeah.
Dana, ready? You ready?
I would agree to that, but out of respect, I would have to okay that with my senior partner that I've played with in almost every senior event ever since he's been old enough, and that'd be Adrian. I don't see him having a problem with it, but I always, if I'm going to go to a tournament, he's done this for me, and I do it for him. If he's going to go play in a tournament, he asks me first, do I want to go? And I'm grateful for that. And so I would do the same thing, you know. But if Adrian gave me his blessing, I would love to get my chance to play with him.
You mean the defending world multi-table senior doubles champion, Adrian Tamara, who won that title with Garrett Schirkenbach in 2019. Might be tough to separate that team, but, you know, I've been taking notes here. I mean, it's been a clinic tonight, Tom Robinson. I hope you have as well. Talking with a guy who really understands the goalie position and has spelled it out so beautifully tonight. I personally just want to thank you for joining us tonight, Dana. Great job.
Oh, it was my pleasure, Jim. If I ever get a chance to do this again, I want a little bit more of advance notice so that I can do some homework with my own timelines and my own research with the almanac and the Foos News.
You got
that. So
thank you, Dana.
Really do advance notice.
Great.
We don't know most of what we're doing until about 30 seconds before go time.
No rules, boy.
So
no rules,
baby. We're up against it now, guys. We got a hard out.
Yeah. Speaking of which, we got to go.
We'll see you. We'll see you, Dana. Thanks, buddy.
Dana.
Thank you, guys.
With us, it's great to have you on, and of course, Mark and Jim and Clay. Always, it's been a blast. Let's do this again next week.
Liz Moore next week.
Nice.
Thank you, guys.
The product of Foosball Radio and Inside Foos TV. All rights reserved. Our sincere thanks to 518 Prince, Foosball Clubs USA, Foosballers The Movie, and the United States Table Soccer Organization. Join us Sunday for another episode of FoosTalk Live. In the meantime,
we'll see you foozin'.